They say grief hits hardest when you're alone. But for Lucas, the silence at his father's funeral was louder than the choir. Everyone stared at the glossy mahogany casket like it held answers. But all Lucas felt was emptiness. His father was gone, his one anchor in a world that often told him he didn't belong. And now, all that remained were ashes, memories, and the eyes of a woman who had never loved him. Diane Emmanuel, his stepmother of 8 years, looked stunning in black lace and pearls. Not a single tear smeared her perfect makeup. She stood front and center at the altar, addressing the crowd with the poise of a pageant queen and the sincerity of a politician. Her voice trembled in all the right places. "Raymond was the love of my life," she said. Though Lucas remembered the way she used to scold his father for leaving socks on the floor or spending too much time in the garage, her eulogy sounded rehearsed, hollow, designed to impress. Not once did she mention Lucas. When it was over, and people trickled out with casseroles and condolences, Lucas sat alone in the back pew. That's when Mr. Cohen, his father's longtime attorney, quietly handed him a sealed envelope. It was thick, aged, and smelled faintly of cedar, the same scent his father wore every Sunday. He waited until nightfall to open it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The familiar slant of his father's pen curled like vines across the page. "Lucas," it began, "I know the world won't be easy for a gay man with integrity, but I've watched you walk it with more courage than most people muster in a lifetime. This money isn't a reward. It's a foundation. Build something, start again, and know that I believe in you more than I ever had the words to say." Lucas sat there, tears soaking the ink, clutching the letter like a lifeline. He wasn't just grieving the man who raised him. He was grieving the last person who truly saw him. Through every awkward coming out moment, through every Christmas where Diane refused to hang his handmade ornaments, his father had quietly, fiercely loved him. The will was clear. Lucas was to receive a significant inheritance, enough for a house, maybe even the start of the coffee gallery he dreamed of. Diane, meanwhile, would keep the home they'd lived in together and enough savings to live comfortably. It wasn't cruel. It was intentional, thought out. His father had made sure they both had what they needed, but had drawn a firm line on what Lucas deserved. Still, as the days passed, Lucas couldn't help but feel the weight of unspoken tension. The funeral was only the beginning. Diane hadn't said much since that day, but her silence felt calculated, her smiles tight, her tone clipped, and something inside Lucas knew this wasn't over. He folded the letter gently, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer next to his bed, next to the framed photo of his father at the beach, laughing with the wind in his hair. Whatever storm was coming, he would be ready. If this story touches a part of your heart, don't forget to follow Heart's Story for more true and powerful journeys. What would you do if someone tried to claim the future meant for you? The next chapter of Lucas's life is only beginning. The house hadn't changed much since the funeral. Same stone path leading to the porch, same wind chimes clinking like tiny skeletons in the wind. But when Lucas stepped inside, the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had chosen sides. He came only to collect a few things: an old sketchbook, a record player from college, a box of his father's tools. He didn't expect Diane to be there. She stood by the fireplace, wine glass in hand, pretending not to hear the door open. When she turned, her smile was brittle, stretched too wide. "I thought you might come crawling back," she said flatly. Lucas didn't respond. He moved quietly through the living room, eyes on the photographs that still lined the walls. None of him, of course. Just Diane in vacation dresses, Diane at charity galas, Diane smiling next to a man who now belonged only to memory. When he entered the study, his father's sanctuary, it felt like trespassing. The scent of cedar lingered faintly, mixed with old books and dust. The desk drawers were empty, the walls bare. Diane had begun erasing him already. Later that evening, an email from her arrived in his inbox. The subject line read simply, "Let's talk." The message wasn't long, but it was loaded. She expressed concern over mounting bills. claimed the roof needed repair. The taxes were higher than expected. And wouldn't it be honorable to help maintain the home his father had cherished? She used words like loan and temporary help, sprinkled with just enough guilt to sting. After all, she wrote, "We are still family." Lucas sat at his kitchen table, staring at the screen, the same table where his father once gave him advice about art school, about heartbreak, about surviving in a world that didn't always welcome boys like him. And now here he was, weighing the meaning of legacy against the burden of obligation. He replied simply, "Dad made his wishes clear. I'm following them." The next message came hours later. It wasn't kind. Diane accused him of being selfish, cold, ungrateful. Said his father would be ashamed. That family comes first, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means bending the final words of a dying man. But Lucas remembered the tone of that letter. The firm, unwavering voice of a father who had watched his son navigate a life Diane had never tried to understand. That letter wasn't a loophole. It was a shield. In the days that followed, Lucas began planning his next move. He researched neighborhoods, visited properties, ran numbers late into the night. The dream of owning his own space, a quiet place where he could breathe, where he didn't have to justify who he was, began to feel possible. Yet the silence from Diane was unnerving. No more emails, no calls, just tension, curling like smoke under every conversation with mutual acquaintances. At brunch with his cousin Rebecca, the first hints surfaced. "I heard you refused to help Diane," she said, not unkindly. "You know she's been through a lot." Lucas didn't flinch. "So have I," he replied. And that was the truth. Grief hadn't made Diane softer. It had sharpened her edges. And now, the house she fought to keep had become a symbol of power, of possession, of a past she wanted to rewrite with herself at the center. Lucas knew that whatever kindness he once tried to extend would be twisted into a weakness. Diane wasn't asking for support. She was demanding submission. And that he would not give. As he left another open house later that week, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement, Lucas felt the weight of a decision already made. This wasn't just about bricks and paint. This was about choosing the life his father believed he deserved. And for the first time in months, the future felt like his again. The gossip didn't take long to spread. A few weeks after Lucas refused Diane's request, the tone of every family conversation began to shift. Birthday messages became colder. Invitations to Sunday dinners stopped. Even his aunt, who once knitted him a rainbow scarf in college, now forwarded him long-winded texts about duty and what Raymond would have wanted. They all seemed to forget that Diane hadn't raised him. She hadn't bandaged his knees or stayed up for late-night fevers. She hadn't sat in silence after he came out at 16, trying to swallow disappointment, only to spit it out through passive-aggressive comments and cold stares. She had married into his life, not built it. But now, with his father gone, they treated Diane like the grieving matriarch and Lucas like the entitled outsider. It didn't matter that Raymond had made his wishes clear. It didn't matter that Diane had received the house, the car, and a generous savings account. What mattered, apparently, was that Lucas had said no. The pressure began with subtle suggestions. His uncle forwarded him an article titled, "What It Means to Be a Man for Your Family." A distant cousin left a comment under one of his house hunting posts. "Don't forget where you came from." Even his godmother sent him a voicemail, her tone syrupy but edged with warning. "You know, sweetie, being gay doesn't mean you don't have responsibilities. Your dad would want you to take care of what's left of your family." Lucas listened to that message twice, then 3 times. Each word felt heavier than the last. He hadn't asked for this role. He hadn't applied to be the emotional accountant for a woman who had never once called him son without a forced smile. But somehow they all expected him to pay a debt he never owed. The nights got longer. Lucas found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying old memories. The time he got into his first fight at school, when a boy called him slurs and shoved him into a locker, it was his father who showed up at the principal's office. Not Diane, His father who told the staff, in front of everyone, that if anyone touched his son again, there would be consequences. Diane had called the incident embarrassing. Or the Christmas when Lucas brought his first boyfriend home, Diane wouldn't let them share a guest room, claimed it was inappropriate. That night, Lucas slept on the couch while Diane set a plate at the table for the cat, but none for his boyfriend. His father said little, but later slipped him a note under the door. Next year, just the two of us. That never happened. His father died the following autumn. Lucas shook the memory off like dust. He was done being manipulated by guilt wrapped in fake concern. He hadn't abandoned his family. They had redrawn the lines around him and expected him to pretend nothing had changed. When a family friend invited him to a charity event one Diane was helping organize, Lucas almost declined, but something inside him wanted to see it, to face the stage where Diane played grieving widow so effortlessly. The room was full of polished shoes and hushed laughs, and Diane was in her element, floating from table to table, glass in hand, stories on cue. When she spotted him, her smile faltered for a split second, barely noticeable, but Lucas saw it. "Lucas," she said, her tone icy behind its warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd show." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Later that evening, as people milled around desserts and soft music, Lucas overheard a conversation between Diane and a woman he didn't recognize. "He got everything. You know," Diane whispered, her voice tinged with bitterness. "And still, he acts like I'm the one who did something wrong." Lucas walked away before he could hear more, but the damage was already done. It was never about the money. It was about control, about appearances, about rewriting the story so Diane could be the one wronged, and Lucas the ungrateful son who dared to honor the truth of his father's last wishes. And no amount of guilt would make him surrender that truth. Lucas hadn't planned to return to Mr. Cohen's office. The man had already guided him through every clause, every page of the will. There was nothing more to learn, or so Lucas thought. But after weeks of whispers, subtle accusations, and public shaming disguised as family concern, something in him needed clarity. Not just for protection, but for peace. Mr. Cohen greeted him with the same quiet solemnity he'd shown at the funeral. His office smelled of old leather and cedar, like a relic from another era. He motioned for Lucas to sit, then pulled open a drawer with care. "I figured you'd come," he said, placing a folder on the desk. "Your father left something else." Lucas froze. "Mom?" The folder was thicker than he expected. Inside it, a printed transcript of a recorded meeting between Mr. Cohen and his father, dated 3 months before his death. On the first page was a handwritten note, "Release only if necessary." Mr. Cohen clicked play on the audio file, his speakers low but clear. Raymond's voice filled the room, calm and steady. "Diane won't understand why I've chosen to leave the bulk of the financial assets to Lucas. She'll say I'm favoring him, but I'm not. I'm correcting something I didn't do enough of when I was alive protecting him." There was a pause, a shuffle of papers. Then Raymond again. "I don't want Diane to manipulate him. She will try. She knows how. But Lucas is the only one who stood by me, even when it cost him comfort. He didn't ask to be anyone's symbol. He just wanted to be seen. If she tries to paint him as selfish, this recording will remind everyone who made the choice and why." The room felt colder, somehow. Lucas didn't cry. He just sat, letting the weight of the words settle. His father hadn't left him money out of pity or guilt. It wasn't a parting gift. It was a shield forged out of love and regret, sharpened by clarity and intention. With Mr. Cohen's help, Lucas gathered the necessary documents, copies of the will, the transcript, and the digital file. Together, they created a sealed packet addressed to key relatives: his aunt, his godmother, his cousin Rebecca, even a few family friends whose opinions had carried too much weight in recent weeks. There was no message, no defense, just truth. He didn't expect apologies. He didn't want them. But what followed was silence, an unfamiliar kind. Not the silence of disappointment or disapproval, but of realization. the kind that makes people look at themselves and then look away. Diane, on the other hand, didn't stay quiet. Within a day, she left him a voicemail, her voice trembling not with grief, but with fury. How dare you weaponize his death like this? You think you've won, that you've proven something. All you've done is show everyone how petty and vindictive you really are. Lucas deleted it without finishing. There was nothing left to answer. He thought that might be the end of it, that perhaps now the chapter could quietly close. But a week later, he got a message from a name he didn't recognize, Cynthia Alvarez, a journalist who specialized in estate law and public interest cases. I've been hearing rumors about a contested inheritance. She wrote, some of the details point to ethical misconduct. Would you be open to sharing your experience? Lucas declined. He didn't need a spotlight. He wasn't interested in public sympathy. What he needed, what he finally had, was a boundary that held firm. Later that evening, as rain tapped gently against the window pane, Lucas pulled out the original letter from his father, the one written in pen, folded neatly in its envelope. He read it again, tracing the words with tired fingers. Each sentence was a confirmation, a reminder that love doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it's written in quiet decisions, protected by legal pages and final wishes. This wasn't revenge, it was preservation. Lucas had always imagined owning a home would feel like crossing a finish line, but when he finally stepped into the narrow, sun-drenched space at the edge of Portland's Arts District, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like exhaling for the first time in years. The keys jingled softly in his palm as he walked room to room. No ghosts, no reminders of silence at dinner tables. Just bare walls waiting for stories to be written. The hardwood creaked under his boots, and he smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Within weeks, the dream took shape. A corner unit became the gallery. The living room opened into a cafe space where strangers could sip espresso under watercolor skies. He called it Ray's Light, a quiet tribute to the man who believed in him long before the world did. The name wasn't printed in bold. It was carved gently into a wooden sign that swayed above the entrance, like a secret meant only for those who needed to see it. He didn't advertise it as an LGBTQ+ space, but people seemed to know. Maybe it was the mismatched chairs, the wall of zines from queer writers, or the playlist that drifted between Nina Simone and modern poetry. Maybe it was the way Lucas greeted every customer like an old friend, even when they didn't know what to say. One afternoon, as he adjusted a tilted painting near the espresso machine, an older man stepped inside. Slender frame, pressed shirt, gray hair neatly parted. He moved slowly, but his eyes scanned the place like he was reading a familiar story. He waited quietly at the counter, then placed a small, worn photograph in front of Lucas. It showed two young men standing side by side on a dock. One of them was unmistakably Raymond 20-something, windswept, smiling like the world hadn't yet hardened him. The other man was the one standing here now. "I'm Thomas," he said softly. "Your father and I were very close, a long time ago." Lucas didn't speak. He let the weight of that confession land without interruption. "I found out about this place through a friend," Thomas continued. "They told me it felt like him. I had to see it for myself." They sat together for hours. Thomas spoke in slow, careful sentences, peeling back years of friendship, heartbreak, and the kind of love that never got the permission it deserved. Raymond, it turned out, had carried more than one kind of secret. He had loved deeply, quietly, and had chosen safety over truth more than once. "But he talked about you," Thomas said near the end. "He was proud of you, said you were brave in all the ways he couldn't be." Lucas nodded, the lump in his throat too heavy to swallow. He didn't need explanations. He didn't need apologies. What he needed was exactly this connection across generations. Proof that silence doesn't erase love, it just delays it. When Thomas left, he gifted Lucas the photo. "Hang it where the light hits best," he said. Lucas framed it above the register, where morning sun filtered through the front windows and danced across their faces. Customers would often pause, tilt their heads, and ask, Who's that? Lucas would smile and say. That's the beginning. He no longer checked Diane's social media. The house she fought to keep became a rental property. No one mentioned her name at family gatherings anymore. And the silence, this time, was welcome. On the one-year anniversary of the cafe's opening, Lucas held a small event. Local artists performed, a trans poet read aloud, and someone strummed a guitar into the twilight. No speeches, no sponsors, just people, laughter, and the quiet, constant presence of love in all its forms. Lucas stood in the doorway as night fell, watching the lights flicker above Ray's light. He thought of everything his father left behind and everything he had built because of it. And as the last guest waved goodbye, he finally whispered, "Thank you." But now I want to hear from you. If someone tried to rewrite the legacy your loved one left you, would you fight to protect it? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to follow Heart Story for more real stories that move your heart and remind you who you really are.